Hi, I'm Victoria. 2 years ago, my parents spent $15,000 on my sister's perfect Christmas while giving me a gas station gift card. They didn't know I was the one secretly funding their entire lifestyle through credit cards I'd co-signed for years earlier. When I watched them hand Delilah the keys to a brand new BMW, while I got a lecture about being grateful for what you have, I made a decision that changed everything. That night, I froze every single account. Now they're facing foreclosure, and I'm the only one who can save them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. This story isn't just about Christmas morning drama. It's about the moment you realize that being the responsible one means everyone else gets to be irresponsible at your expense. And sometimes, the only way to make people see your worth is to show them what happens when you disappear. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the seeds of this Christmas catastrophe were planted long before December ever arrived. I'd been living in Millbrook Heights, a quiet suburb outside Portland, working 60-hour weeks as a senior financial analyst at Hartwell & Associates. For 3 years straight, I'd been carrying my family's financial burden without them even realizing it. See, when I turned 21 and got my first real job, my parents convinced me to co-sign on their mortgage refinancing. Just to help with the credit score, they said. "You're so responsible, Victoria. We trust you." What started as co-signing a mortgage became co-signing car loans, credit cards, even a line of credit for my father's failed attempt at starting a landscaping business. By the time I was 25, my name was attached to over $80,000 in family debt that they treated like monopoly money. But here's the thing. I was making good money. Really good money. So when the payments got behind, I just quietly covered them. When the credit card bills piled up, I transferred the balances to accounts I could manage. I told myself I was being a good daughter, keeping the family stable. I told myself that love meant sacrifice. Meanwhile, my younger sister Delilah was living her best life in San Francisco, working part-time at a boutique and spending her weekends at wine tastings that our parents funded. She'd post Instagram stories from Napa Valley while I was eating ramen for dinner, so I could make sure Mom and Dad's house payment went through. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It never had been. Delilah was the artistic one, the free spirit, the daughter who needed more support to find herself. I was the stable one, the reliable one, the daughter who had everything figured out and therefore needed nothing. When Delilah decided she wanted to move back home to reconnect with family and pursue her photography, our parents didn't just welcome her back. They renovated the entire basement into a luxury apartment for her. They installed a kitchenette, a separate entrance, and even paid for professional lighting equipment for her studio space. The cost? $25,000. Money that, unbeknownst to them, was ultimately coming from credit lines that my signature had guaranteed. I lived in a cramped studio apartment 20 minutes away, paying my own rent while subsidizing their mortgage. But Christmas morning 2022 was when the mask finally slipped completely off. I'd driven over early that morning, the way I had every Christmas for the past 5 years. I brought homemade cinnamon rolls, the recipe our grandmother had taught me before she passed, and a carefully chosen gift for everyone. For Dad, a vintage watch I'd found at an estate sale. For Mom, a first edition copy of her favorite novel. For Delilah, a professional camera lens she'd been wanting. I walked into the living room to find a scene that looked like a luxury car commercial. A massive red bow sat on top of a gleaming white BMW X3, parked in the driveway, visible through the front window. Delilah was crying happy tears, hugging both parents while they beamed with pride. "Surprise, sweetheart," Mom was saying. "You've been working so hard on your art, and we wanted you to have reliable transportation for all your photo shoots." The car was worth more than I made in 6 months. I stood in the doorway, still holding the cinnamon rolls, watching this family celebration that I wasn't part of. When they finally noticed me, Dad's smile got a little tighter. "Victoria, perfect timing. Come see Delilah's gift." I walked closer, still processing. This is incredible. How did you—" "Oh, we've been saving for months," Mom said quickly. Making sacrifices, you know. We really wanted to do something special for Delilah's new chapter. Saving. Sacrifices. I almost laughed. What about... I started to ask about my gift, then stopped myself. It felt petty. But Delilah bounced over, glowing with excitement. Victoria, look! Isn't it perfect? And Mom and Dad got me the insurance paid up for the whole year, plus they're covering the registration and everything. My stomach dropped. Insurance for a year. Registration. Tax, title, license. I was looking at $20,000 minimum, probably closer to $25,000 when everything was factored in. That's amazing, I managed. And then Mom handed me a small wrapped box. Gas station gift card. $25. We know you're practical, she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We thought you could use this for your commute. I stared at that gift card while my sister revved the engine of her new BMW in the driveway. $25. While I'd been quietly paying their mortgage for 3 years. Duam so kasaz. That's when everything became crystal clear. Duam so kasaz. Ever talksies, you fees. I wasn't their daughter, I was their safety net. Duam so kasaz. And that night, I cut the rope. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hells. The week leading up to Christmas had felt different, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Looking back now, I think it was the way my mother's voice got a little too bright whenever I called, or how my father kept deflecting when I asked about their holiday plans. It was December 18th, a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment in Millbrook Heights, wrapped in my grandmother's old quilt, laptop balanced on my knees as I reviewed quarterly reports for Hartwell & Associates. The radiator clanked its familiar rhythm, and weak winter sunlight filtered through windows that desperately needed washing. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept sipping it anyway, a habit I'd developed during the endless late nights of keeping everyone else's finances afloat. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Don't forget, Christmas Eve dinner at 6. Can't wait to see you, sweetheart. It's going to be such a special Christmas this year. Red heart. I smiled at the screen. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion of carrying everyone's financial burden in silence, I genuinely loved Christmas with my family. It was the one time of year when the dynamics felt almost normal, when we'd gather around Mom's dining room table and pretend we were the close-knit family from holiday movies. Can't wait either, I texted back. Need me to bring anything? Just yourself. Though you know how much Dad loves your cinnamon rolls winking face. I laughed, already mentally planning my evening. I'd stop at the specialty grocery store after work to get the good cinnamon, the kind that actually made a difference. I'd spent the previous weekend carefully selecting everyone's gifts, thoughtful, meaningful presents that I'd saved up for over months. The vintage watch for Dad had cost me 3 weeks of grocery money, but seeing his face when he opened it would be worth every sacrifice. That afternoon, I was deep in a budget analysis when my work phone rang. Linda from accounting, sounding frazzled. Victoria, I hate to bother you, but there's something weird with your direct deposit. The bank called about insufficient funds for your automatic transfers? My stomach dropped. I managed the family finances so carefully, always making sure there was enough cushion for my own bills while covering theirs. Which transfers? Looks like... Let me see. Your parents' mortgage payment bounced yesterday, and there's a credit card payment that's trying to process but can't clear. I closed my eyes, quickly calculating in my head. I'd been so focused on making sure they'd have a perfect Christmas, setting aside extra money for whatever surprise expenses came up, that I'd miscalculated my own cash flow. I'll transfer money from savings, I said quickly. Can you rerun it this afternoon? Of course. Everything okay? Yeah, just holiday expenses, you know. But as I hung up, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. The same knot I'd been carrying for 3 years, ever since I first co-signed that mortgage refinance. I pulled up my banking app and moved $3,000 from my emergency savings to checking, watching my safety net shrink once again. It was so routine by now. Mom and Dad would spend freely, assuming their bills would somehow get paid. Credit cards would hit their limits, minimum payments would be forgotten, and I'd quietly shuffle money around to keep their credit scores from tanking. They never asked where the money came from. They never wondered why their financial problems always seemed to resolve themselves. I was their invisible safety net, and they didn't even know I existed. That evening, I drove to their house in Riverside Oaks, a neighborhood that had definitely appreciated since they'd bought in 15 years ago. The houses were larger here, with manicured lawns and two-car garages. Their home was a beautiful colonial with white columns and hunter green shutters, surrounded by professional landscaping that Dad maintained meticulously. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Dad's truck was parked next to Mom's sedan, both cars relatively new and both financed through loans I'd co-signed. The porch light glowed warmly, and through the front window I could see the Christmas tree twinkling in the living room. Everything looked perfect. Normal, like a family that had their life together. I grabbed the container of cinnamon roll dough I'd prepared earlier and walked up to the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open. "Victoria!" Mom pulled me into a hug that smelled like her usual perfume and something else. Excitement, maybe. Anticipation. Come in, we have so much to tell you." Dad appeared behind her, grinning wider than I'd seen in months. "Hey, kiddo. Perfect timing." The house felt warm and festive, exactly the way it always did during the holidays. Mom had outdone herself with decorations. Garland wrapped around the staircase banister, stockings hung by the fireplace. The dining room table set with her good china even though it was just a regular Tuesday dinner. "Where's Delilah?" I asked, hanging my coat in the closet. "Oh. She's out with friends," Mom said, her voice getting that particular tone it always took when discussing my sister's social life. "You know how popular she is. But she'll be here Christmas Eve, of course." We settled around the kitchen island while Mom finished cooking. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Dad asked about work. Mom showed me pictures from her book club's holiday party, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in weeks. This was what I was protecting, I reminded myself. This warmth, this sense of family, this feeling of belonging somewhere. The financial stress was worth it for moments like these. "So," Dad said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smile, "we have some exciting news to share." Mom practically bounced with excitement. "We've been planning something really special for Christmas this year, something that's going to make it absolutely unforgettable." I felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with a tiny thread of anxiety. In my experience, my parents' exciting news usually meant expensive decisions that would somehow find their way onto my financial plate. But I pushed that thought away. It was Christmas. Whatever they had planned, we'd figure it out. We always did. "I can't wait to hear," I said, and I genuinely meant it. Looking back now, I realize that was the last moment I felt truly at peace in that house. The last time I sat at that kitchen island believing I was a cherished daughter instead of a financial convenience. But in that moment, surrounded by twinkling lights and the smell of Mom's famous pot roast, everything felt perfectly, blissfully normal. The next morning, I woke up with that strange feeling you get when your subconscious has been working on a puzzle all night. Something about the way my parents had looked at each other during dinner, the way they'd exchanged those little glances when they thought I wasn't watching. There was an energy in the house that felt different from regular Christmas excitement. Mute. I tried to shake it off as I got ready for work. Maybe I was just overthinking things. Maybe the financial stress was making me paranoid. But as I drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook Heights, past houses decorated with inflatable Santas and strings of multicolored lights, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface of our family dynamic. At work, I found myself distracted during meetings, my mind wandering back to that conversation with Mom and Dad. "Something really special," Mom had said. "Unforgettable," Dad had added. In any other family, that might sound like a wonderful surprise. In mine, it usually meant someone had made an expensive decision without consulting their budget. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed with a text from Delilah. We didn't communicate often. She lived in her world of art galleries and coffee shop poetry readings, while I lived in mine of spreadsheets and fiscal responsibility. But seeing her name on my screen made me smile. Hey sis, can't wait for Christmas. Mom says you're going to love the surprise gift sparkles. I stared at the message, feeling that knot in my stomach tighten. Delilah knew about the surprise, which meant it wasn't just a last-minute impulse buy. This was something they'd been planning, something they'd discussed with her but not with me. I typed back, "Any hints?" Winking face. Her response came immediately. "Nice try, but my lips are sealed. Just know that Mom and Dad have been working on this for months. Months." They'd been planning something for months and hadn't mentioned it to me once. Not during any of our weekly dinners. Not during the dozens of phone calls where they talked about holiday plans and family gatherings. I set my phone down and tried to focus on the quarterly budget report spread across my desk, but the numbers kept blurring together. Something was wrong with this picture. In a family where I'd somehow become the financial backbone, where every major expense eventually found its way to my bank account, how could they plan something expensive for months without including me in the conversation? That afternoon, I decided to drive past their house on my way home from work. Not to snoop, exactly, just to check on things. Make sure everything was okay. Riverside Oaks looked picture-perfect in the late afternoon light, every house a testament to suburban prosperity. But as I turned down Maple Grove Drive, I saw something that made me slow down and squint through my windshield. There was a delivery truck in my parents' driveway. Not just any delivery truck. A flatbed trailer with a car wrapped in a protective covering strapped to the back. My heart started beating faster as I pulled over across the street, partially hidden behind the Hendersons' oversized SUV. I watched as two men in uniforms carefully maneuvered whatever was under that covering down a ramp. Even wrapped up, I could tell it was a vehicle. A nice one, from the shape of it. Dad came out of the garage, gesturing and pointing, clearly directing where they should position it. Then Mom appeared, practically dancing with excitement as she supervised the whole operation. She kept looking toward the house like she was checking to make sure no one was watching from the windows. My hands gripped the steering wheel as realization started to dawn. They were hiding a car. A surprise car. And given the timing, given Delilah's cryptic texts and their mysterious excitement, I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who this surprise was for. I sat in my car for 20 more minutes, watching as they carefully moved the wrapped vehicle into their garage and closed the door. Dad high-fived one of the delivery guys. Mom was literally jumping up and down. "Ja, Karar." When I finally drove home to my cramped studio apartment, my mind was racing. A car. They'd bought someone a car. And from the looks of that flatbed trailer, it wasn't some used Honda from the lot down the street. New. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I logged into the online banking portal for the credit card account, where I was listed as an authorized user, one of the many financial entanglements I'd agreed to over the years to help with their credit score. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through recent transactions. There it was, December 15th, Riverside Auto Luxury, $18,500. I stared at that number until it burned into my retinas. $18,500. Charged to a credit card that was technically in my father's name, but guaranteed by my credit score, my income verification, my signature on a dozen different financial documents. But that wasn't all. I kept scrolling. Insurance premium, paid in full for 12 months. Registration fees, extended warranty, ceramic coating protection, premium floor mats. The charges kept coming, each one a small stab of betrayal. Total, $23,847. Almost $24,000. For a surprise. For someone who wasn't me. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark of my apartment, listening to my upstairs neighbor's television through the thin walls. My emergency savings account, the one I'd just depleted to cover their mortgage payment, had $2,100 left in it. My checking account had enough to cover my rent and groceries for the next 2 weeks. And somewhere in Riverside Oaks, there was a luxury car sitting in my parents' garage, waiting to make someone's Christmas dreams come true. Someone who wasn't their daughter who'd been quietly keeping their financial world from collapsing for 3 years. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Can't wait for you to see everyone's faces Christmas morning. It's going to be such a magical day. 2 hearts. I stared at that heart emoji for a long time. Then I scrolled back through my text history with my parents. Months of conversations about family dinners, work stress, weekend plans. Not once had they asked how I was managing financially. Not once had they wondered if covering their expenses was putting strain on my own life. They'd gotten so comfortable with their invisible safety net that they'd forgotten I was a real person with real limitations. But here's what they didn't know. I kept meticulous records. Every payment I'd made on their behalf, every loan I'd covered, every time I'd transferred money to keep their accounts current. I had spreadsheets, bank statements, payment confirmations. 3 years' worth of financial documentation that painted a very clear picture of who was really funding the Riverside Oaks lifestyle. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the folder labeled Family Finances, $47,632. That's how much I'd quietly contributed to their expenses since that first mortgage co-signing. Almost $50,000 that they'd spent without a second thought, assuming it would somehow always be there. And now they'd added a $24,000 car to the tab without even telling me they were shopping. I picked up my phone and started typing a text to my mother. Then I deleted it. Started again. Deleted it again. Me. What was I supposed to say? Hey Mom, saw you guys bought a car with money you don't have. Just wondering if you remember that I've been paying your bills for 3 years? Instead, I set the phone aside and opened a new spreadsheet. If they wanted to play financial games, it was time they understood exactly what game they'd been playing and who had been keeping score. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes the air hurt to breathe. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind cycling through different scenarios, different ways this could play out. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that maybe the car was for Dad, or maybe they'd found some miracle source of funding I didn't know about. But deep down, I knew exactly what I was going to walk into. Yeah, I spent the morning making those cinnamon rolls, following Grandma's recipe with mechanical precision. Mixing, kneading, rolling. The familiar motions usually brought me comfort, but today they felt like preparation for battle. I'd made a decision during those sleepless hours. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. If they were going to unveil their special surprise, then I was going to unveil a few truths of my own. I dressed carefully that morning, my nicest sweater, the one that made me look professional and put together. I wanted to look like someone who deserved respect. Someone whose financial contributions mattered. I slipped my laptop into a discreet bag along with the gifts I'd carefully chosen weeks ago. If this conversation went where I thought it would, I wanted documentation ready. The drive to Riverside Oaks felt longer than usual. Holiday traffic was light, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the radio. Christmas songs played cheerfully in the background, Silver Bells and White Christmas, creating a surreal soundtrack for what I knew might be the last normal Christmas Eve I'd ever have with my family. When I pulled into their driveway at exactly 5:45 p.m., I noticed immediately that the garage door was closed, and there was a large red bow attached to it. My stomach dropped. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Delilah's rental car was already there. A sporty little Mustang that probably cost more per day than I spent on groceries in a week. Through the front window, I could see warm lights spilling from the living room and shadows moving around inside. Everyone was here. Everyone was ready for the show. I took a deep breath, grabbed my bags, and walked to the front door. Mom opened it before I could knock, her face glowing with barely contained excitement. "Victoria!" "Perfect timing, sweetheart. Come in, come in. We're just about to start dinner." The house smelled like her famous glazed ham and rosemary potatoes. The Christmas tree dominated the living room corner, surrounded by carefully arranged presents. Everything looked exactly like a holiday card, exactly like the kind of Christmas I'd always dreamed of having. "Where should I put these?" I asked, holding up the container of cinnamon rolls. "Oh, just set them in the kitchen. Dad's so excited. He's been talking about your rolls all week." I followed her toward the dining room, where Dad and Delilah were already seated. Dad looked up with that same enormous grin I'd seen in the driveway 3 days ago. "There's our Victoria. Come here, kiddo." He hugged me tightly, and for a moment I almost forgot why I was angry. This was the dad who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd stayed up all night helping me with calculus homework, who'd cried at my college graduation. But then I remembered the delivery truck, the credit card statements, The months of planning that hadn't included me. "So," Delilah said as I took my seat, "are you ready for the surprise?" There was something in her voice, a smugness that I'd never noticed before, or maybe had always chosen to ignore. She was practically vibrating with anticipation, like she was about to witness something spectacular. "I'm curious," I said carefully. "Mom and Dad have been very mysterious." Mom laughed, that high, excited laugh she got when she was the center of attention. "We've been planning this for months, haven't we, honey?" She looked at Dad, who nodded enthusiastically. "Months of saving," Dad said. "Making sacrifices. But it's going to be so worth it when you see Delilah's face." Delilah's face. Not my face. Delilah's. "We thought," Mom continued, "that since Delilah is starting this new chapter in her life, really focusing on her photography business, she needed something reliable. Something that would help her succeed. And," Dad added, "she's been such a good sport about moving back home, helping us around the house. She deserves something special." I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Anger. Pure, clean anger that cut through years of people-pleasing and financial martyrdom. "That's really generous of you both," I said evenly. "I'm curious, how did you manage to save up so much money?" There was a beat of silence. Mom and Dad exchanged one of those looks. "Well," Mom said slowly, "we've been very careful with our budget. Cutting back on unnecessary expenses." "Right," Dad added. "No more eating out. Canceled our cable package, that sort of thing." I nodded, taking a sip of my water. "And the $23,847 charge from Riverside Auto Luxury? That came from your savings?" The silence that followed was deafening. Delilah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Mom's face went pale. Dad's jovial expression cracked like ice. "How do you," Mom started, then stopped. "Know about that?" I finished. "Because I'm a cosigner on the credit card you used. Because I get notifications for every charge over $500. Because for the past 3 years, I've been monitoring your finances to make sure nothing bounces." Dad cleared his throat. "Victoria, we can explain." "Can you?" I opened my bag and pulled out my laptop. "Because I've been keeping track, and I'm really curious how this math works out." I opened the spreadsheet I'd been working on for the past 2 days and turned the screen toward them. $47,632 in payments I'd made on their behalf. Color-coded by category. Mortgage payments, credit card minimums, car loan supplements, insurance premiums, emergency transfers. "This is what I've contributed to this household over the past 3 years," I said. "Almost $50,000. Money that came out of my paycheck, my savings, my emergency fund. Money that I've never once asked you to pay back." Delilah was staring at the screen, her face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Victoria, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," I said. "Why would you? You've been living your dream life in San Francisco, posting Instagram stories from wine country, while I've been making sure Mom and Dad's credit score doesn't tank." "Now wait just a minute," Dad said, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he used when he wanted to end an argument. "We never asked you to." "You did ask me," I interrupted. "You asked me to co-sign. You asked me to be responsible. You asked me to be the stable one, the reliable one, the one who always has everything figured out. What you never asked me was if I wanted to fund your lifestyle while living on ramen and hope." Mom's eyes were filling with tears. "Sweetheart, we didn't realize." "You didn't realize because you never asked. You never wondered why your bills always got paid even when you overspent. You never questioned why your credit score stayed high even when you maxed out cards. You just assumed that somehow, magically, everything would work out." I clicked to the next tab on my spreadsheet. "This shows your actual household income versus your spending for the past year. You've been living $1,800 over your means every single month. Every month for 12 months. Where did you think that money was coming from?" The dining room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Delilah was staring down at her plate like she was trying to disappear. Dad was rubbing his temples. Mom was crying silently. "So here's what I want to know," I continued, my voice steady despite the fact that my hands were shaking. "When you were planning this months-long surprise, when you were shopping for luxury cars and extended warranties, when you were arranging delivery trucks and red bows, did it ever occur to you to check if you actually had $24,000 to spend?" "The car isn't," Delilah started, then stopped. "Isn't what? Isn't expensive? Isn't unnecessary? Isn't being paid for with money that ultimately comes from my bank account?" I closed the laptop and looked around the table at these three people I'd loved my entire life. "I want to know who you think I am in this family. Because apparently, I'm not the daughter who deserves a thoughtful Christmas gift. I'm not the sister who gets included in big family decisions. I'm not even the person who gets told when you're spending money that I'm guaranteeing." "Victoria," Dad said quietly, "we love you, you know that." "Do I?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you love what I provide. You love my credit score, my steady income, my willingness to clean up your financial messes without asking questions. But do you love me, the person? The daughter who works 60-hour weeks and lives in a studio apartment and hasn't taken a vacation in 3 years because every spare dollar goes to keeping your perfect life afloat?" Nobody answered. And in that silence, everything became crystal clear. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could hear the central heating kick on. The distant sound of neighbors laughing at their own Christmas Eve celebrations, the soft tick of Mom's antique mantel clock. But at our table, no one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Victoria, I think you're being a little dramatic here. We're family. Family helps each other out." That broke something inside me. The last thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, they would acknowledge what they'd done, apologize, try to make things right. "Family helps each other out," I repeated slowly. "You're right, Dad. Family does help each other out. So tell me, when was the last time this family helped me out?" I stood up from my chair, my hands surprisingly steady, now that the worst part was over. The truth was out there, sitting on the table between us like a bomb that had already exploded. When I was working 3 jobs to put myself through college, did anyone offer to help? When I had to choose between fixing my car's transmission and making my rent, did anyone ask if I needed anything? When I've been living on instant noodles for weeks at a time so I could make sure your mortgage payment cleared, did anyone notice I'd lost 15 pounds? Mom was crying harder now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Sweetheart, we didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," I said. It was easier to assume I was fine, that I had everything under control, that I was just naturally good with money. It never occurred to any of you that maybe I was good with money because I had to be, because I was managing everyone else's financial disasters along with my own. Delilah finally spoke up, her voice small. "Victoria, I really didn't know about any of this. Mom and Dad never told me you were helping them financially." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The expensive highlights in her hair that got touched up every 6 weeks. The designer jeans that probably cost more than my grocery budget for a month. The delicate gold jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. "Of course they didn't tell you," I said. "Why would they? You were living your best life in San Francisco, pursuing your dreams, being the artistic free spirit. Meanwhile, I was here being the responsible one, the stable one, the one who could be counted on to fix everything." "That's not fair," Delilah said, her voice getting stronger. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask them to buy me a car. Didn't you?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled through her Instagram posts from the past few months. Let's see. My car is literally falling apart. I need a Christmas miracle. Mom and Dad are the absolute best. They always know exactly what I need. Can't wait to see what surprises Christmas brings this year. I held up the phone so everyone could see the posts. "You've been dropping hints for months, talking about how hard it is to get to photo shoots without reliable transportation, complaining about repair costs and insurance rates. You knew exactly what you were doing." Dad's face was getting red, the way it always did when he felt cornered. Now you listen here, Victoria. We've worked hard our entire lives to provide for this family. If we want to do something nice for your sister, that's our choice." "With what money, Dad?" I asked. "With what money? You are spending $1,800 more than you make every single month. Every month. Your savings account has $347 in it. Your checking account is overdrawn right now. I transferred money this morning to cover it. So tell me, with what money did you buy a $24,000 car?" The question hung in the air like smoke. We all knew the answer. "We'll pay you back," Mom said desperately. "We'll figure out a payment plan. With what?" I asked again. "You're already behind on everything. The only reason your credit score isn't in the toilet is because I've been propping it up for 3 years. The only reason you haven't lost this house is because I've been covering the shortfalls on your mortgage payments." I walked over to the window and looked out at the garage with its red bow, at the neighborhood full of houses where families were probably opening presents and laughing together. Normal families. Families where financial boundaries existed, where parents didn't bankrupt their children to fund their other children's dreams. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, turning back to face them. "I'm removing myself as co-signer from every account, effective immediately. I'm cutting up the credit cards where I'm listed as an authorized user. I'm closing the joint checking account we set up for, quote, emergencies. That somehow always seem to be your emergencies, never mine." "Victoria, please," Dad said, his authoritative tone completely gone now. "Let's be reasonable here. We can work this out." "I am being reasonable," I said. "I'm being more reasonable than you deserve. I'm not asking you to pay back the $50,000 you've already spent. I'm just saying the bank is closed. No more co-signing, no more emergency transfers, no more Victoria fixing everything." Mom stood up, her hands shaking. "You can't do this. You can't just abandon your family." The irony was so thick I almost laughed. "I can't abandon my family? Mom, look around this room, look at this dinner table, look at this conversation. Who abandoned who?" I walked back to my chair and picked up my laptop bag. "I've been sitting here for 25 minutes explaining how I've financially supported this household for 3 years, and not one of you has said thank you. Not one of you has apologized. The only thing any of you can talk about is how I can't stop now." "But what about the car payment?" Delilah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about it? If you remove yourself from the credit accounts, how will we make the payments?" I stared at her. "That's not my problem anymore." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. For 3 years, everything had been my problem. Every overdue notice, every declined transaction, every financial crisis. Somehow, it had all become my responsibility to solve. I'd gotten so used to being the family's financial safety net that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be responsible for myself. "You can return the car," I said. "Most dealerships have a return policy within the first few days, especially for luxury vehicles. You'll lose the delivery fee and maybe pay a restocking charge, but you'll get most of your money back." "But it's Christmas," Mom said. "It's Delilah's Christmas present. Then you should have bought her a Christmas present you could afford." I headed toward the front door, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly too quiet house. Behind me, I could hear Mom crying, Dad muttering angrily under his breath, Delilah's chair scraping against the floor. "Victoria, wait!" Delilah called out. "Where are you going?" I turned around one last time. My sister looked genuinely distressed, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the old guilt, the old urge to fix things and smooth them over and pretend everything was fine. But then I remembered the credit card statements, the secret planning, the months of excitement about a surprise that was never meant for me, the $25 gas station gift card that was supposed to be enough because I was practical. "I'm going home," I said, "to my studio apartment that I pay for myself, to spend Christmas morning alone, which is apparently what I've been doing for years anyway. I just didn't realize it." "Don't leave like this," Dad said. "Don't leave angry." "I'm not leaving angry," I said. "I'm leaving free." And for the first time in 3 years, that was exactly how it felt. I walked out into the cold Christmas Eve air, got in my car, and drove away from Riverside Oaks. In my rearview mirror, I could see the warm glow of their windows, the perfect picture of holiday celebration. But I wasn't looking back anymore. Had calls to make, banks to contact, financial entanglements to untangle. And tomorrow was Christmas morning, and for the first time in years, I was going to wake up knowing exactly how much money was in my bank account, because it was all mine. Christmas morning arrived gray and silent. I woke up in my studio apartment to the sound of absolutely nothing. No holiday music from neighbors, no families rushing around outside, no phone calls from relatives wishing me Merry Christmas. For the first time in my adult life, December 25th felt like just another Sunday. I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the water stain on my ceiling that I'd been meaning to report to my landlord for months. The apartment felt smaller than usual, more cramped, the walls pressing in with a loneliness I hadn't expected. This was what I'd chosen. This was freedom. So why did it feel so much like punishment? Dajan Hesiel. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No missed calls, no text messages, nothing. In previous years, my phone would have been buzzing by 7 a.m. with Christmas wishes, family check-ins, photos of presents being unwrapped. The silence felt heavier than any words could have. I made coffee in my tiny kitchen, the same instant stuff I'd been drinking for months, because I couldn't justify spending $15 on the good beans when that money could go toward keeping someone else's lights on. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that I'd cut those financial ties, I could afford better coffee, but I had no one to share Christmas morning with. Around 9 a.m., my phone finally buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Merry Christmas, Victoria. Hope you're proud of yourself. The car had to go back. Delilah is devastated. Hope it was worth it. Dad?" I stared at that message for a full 5 minutes. Even now, even after everything that had been said last night, he still didn't get it. It wasn't about the car. It had never been about the car. It was about being invisible, being taken for granted, being valued only for what I could provide, rather than who I was. Wana. I deleted the message without responding, Alasi. But as the morning wore on, doubt started creeping in. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I should have handled it differently. Maybe I was being selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. These were the thoughts that had kept me trapped for 3 years. The voice in my head that said good daughters sacrifice for their families, that love means never asking for anything in return. I decided to get out of the apartment before those thoughts could take root any deeper. I drove aimlessly through Millbrook Heights, past houses decorated with lights, past families loading into cars to visit relatives, past the life I thought I wanted but had never actually experienced. I ended up at Riverside Park, the one place in town that stayed open on Christmas Day. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a few other cars belonging to people who apparently had nowhere else to be. I sat on a bench overlooking the river, watching the water move slowly under a bridge covered in icicles. That's when I really started to understand what I'd lost, and what I'd never had in the first place. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through 3 years of family photos on social media. Birthday dinners, where I was always the one behind the camera. Holiday celebrations, where I was positioned slightly outside the main group. Vacation pictures that I wasn't in because someone needed to stay home and work to pay for everyone else's trips. In every single photo, I was either absent or on the periphery. The reliable daughter. The responsible one. The family member who could be counted on to take care of business while everyone else had fun. I found a video from last Christmas that Delilah had posted to her Instagram story. The whole family opening presents in the living room I'd helped pay the mortgage on. Mom and Dad laughing as Delilah unwrapped a professional photography lighting kit that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Everyone looked so happy, so natural, so complete. And there I was in the corner, barely visible, opening a gift card to Target. Even then, even a year ago, the pattern was there. I just hadn't been ready to see it. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Mom's number flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Givani. Victoria? Her voice was small, uncertain. Sweetheart, can we talk? We talked last night, Mom. I know, but I've been thinking all night about what you said. About the money, about how we've treated you. I think maybe we made some mistakes. Some mistakes. Like accidentally backing into a mailbox was some mistake. Like forgetting someone's birthday was some mistake. Not systematically exploiting your daughter's financial stability for 3 years while treating her like a second-class family member. "Where are you?" I asked. "At home. He's pretty upset. And Delilah, she's having a hard time understanding why you had to be so harsh about everything." "Is she there?" "Yes, we're all here. We were hoping maybe you could come over so we could work this out as a family." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pull of obligation, the deeply ingrained need to fix things, to smooth things over, to be the responsible one who makes everything okay again. "Mom," I said slowly, "what exactly do you think we need to work out?" "Well, the financial situation, obviously. We need to figure out how to manage things going forward. And Delilah is really upset about the car situation. She had her heart set on it, and she's been telling all her friends about it, and now she's embarrassed. It's not just that. She's hurt, Victoria. She feels like you targeted her specifically, like you wanted to ruin her Christmas." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mom, do you hear yourself right now? You called me on Christmas morning to tell me that Delilah is hurt because I won't pay for her car anymore? That's not what I meant. Isn't it?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, "We just want our family back together." "What family?" I asked. "The family where I work 60 hours a week to subsidize everyone else's lifestyle? The family where I'm good enough to co-sign loans, but not good enough to be included in major decisions? The family where my Christmas present is a gas station gift card while my sister gets a BMW? Victoria, please. We love you." "Do you?" The question came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't take it back. Because last night, when I laid out 3 years of financial documentation showing how I've been supporting this family, not one of you said thank you. Not one of you apologized. The only thing any of you cared about was how this was going to affect you. I stood up from the bench and started walking back toward my car. The conversation was going exactly where I'd known it would go. Toward guilt, toward obligation, toward me somehow being responsible for fixing the mess they'd created. "I'm not coming over, Mom," I said. "I'm not going to sit around that table and be made to feel guilty for refusing to be your personal ATM anymore. But it's Christmas." Christmas ended for me the moment you handed me a $25 gift card after spending $24,000 on someone else. Christmas ended when I realized I've been funding a family that doesn't actually include me. I hung up and sat in my car for a long time, hands shaking, heart racing. The phone rang again immediately, Mom calling back. I turned it off. For the first time in 3 years, Christmas Day passed without me transferring money to cover someone else's expenses. No emergency calls about overdue bills. No frantic texts about declined credit cards. No last-minute financial crises that somehow became my responsibility to solve. The silence was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner. Nothing fancy, nothing that would have impressed anyone on Instagram, and sat at my small table with a legal pad, writing down everything I wanted my life to look like now that it was actually mine again. Travel. I wanted to travel. I wanted to see places I'd only dreamed about while I was busy funding other people's adventures. Maui. Education. I'd been putting off taking additional certification courses because I couldn't afford them. Savings. Real savings. Not the kind that got drained every month to cover other people's poor decisions. Independence. Complete, total, uncompromising independence. As I wrote, I realized something that should have been obvious but felt like a revelation. For the first time in my adult life, every dollar I earned was going to be mine to keep. Every financial decision I made was going to benefit me directly. Every choice about how to spend my money was going to be made by me, for me. It was Christmas night, I was alone, and I'd lost the only family I'd ever known. But I was free. And freedom, I was learning, was worth everything it cost. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a strange blur of silence and paperwork. I spent my days calling banks, credit card companies, and financial institutions, methodically removing my name from every account I'd co-signed over the years. Each conversation was a small victory and a small heartbreak, cutting ties that had been bleeding me dry, but also severing the last connections to the family I'd thought I belonged to. By December 28th, I'd successfully removed myself from the mortgage, 3 credit cards, 2 car loans, and the home equity line of credit. The customer service representatives were professional but curious. Apparently, it's not that common for someone to remove themselves from accounts they've been helping to pay. When they asked for my reason, I always gave the same answer: change in family circumstances. That Friday morning, I was sitting in my usual corner booth at Brewster's Cafe, the little coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment, working on my laptop and enjoying the first decent cup of coffee I'd bought myself in months. The place was nearly empty except for a few other people who apparently had nowhere else to be during the holiday week. I was deep in reviewing my own budget, calculating how much extra money I'd have each month now that I wasn't covering anyone else's expenses, when someone slid into the booth across from me. Victoria Chen. I looked up to see a woman about my age, maybe a little older, with short auburn hair and intelligent brown eyes. She was wearing a well-tailored blazer and had the kind of confident presence that suggested she was used to being taken seriously in professional settings. "Yes," I said cautiously. I didn't recognize her, and after the week I'd had, unexpected visitors made me nervous. "I'm Rachel Martinez. I'm a financial advisor with Pinnacle Wealth Management." She extended her hand, which I shook tentatively. "I hope you don't mind me approaching you like this, but I heard about your situation through some mutual connections, and I wanted to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. "What situation?" "The family financial situation you've been dealing with. Look, I know this might sound strange, but you're not the first person I've met who's been in your position. Not by a long shot." I closed my laptop, suddenly very aware that we were having this conversation in public. "I'm not sure what you think you know, but I know that you've been financially supporting your parents for several years," she said quietly. "I know that you recently removed yourself from their accounts after they made a major purchase without consulting you. And I know that you're probably feeling guilty about it, even though you did exactly the right thing." I stared at her. "How could you possibly know any of that?" Rachel smiled, but it wasn't a predatory smile. It was warm, understanding, almost relieved. "Because 6 months ago, I was in your exact shoes. Different family, same story. My younger brother was the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the responsible one, who somehow became the family's personal lending institution." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo, a young man standing next to a gleaming motorcycle, grinning broadly. "That's Tyler, 26 years old, never held a job for more than 6 months, but somehow always had money for expensive toys. Want to guess who is co-signing all his loans?" "How did you find out about my situation?" I asked. "My friend Jenna works at Mountain View Credit Union. She can't give me details about accounts, obviously, but she mentioned that she'd processed an unusual number of co-signer removal requests this week from someone who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. She was impressed by how thorough and organized you were." I felt a strange mixture of pride and embarrassment. I may have gone a little overboard with the documentation. "Are you kidding? That's exactly what you should do. Most people in our situation just walk away without protecting themselves legally. You've got paper trails, you've got dates, you've got proof of every payment you made. That's smart." Rachel leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. "Victoria, can I tell you something? What you did took incredible courage. Most people never break free from family financial abuse because they can't get past the guilt." Family financial abuse. I'd never heard those words put together like that, but they hit me like a physical blow. Is that what this was? What would you call it when family members systematically exploit someone's financial stability while providing nothing in return? When they make major purchases using money that person is ultimately responsible for, without even consulting them? When they treat someone like a human credit card instead of a family member? I felt tears starting to form, and I blinked them back quickly. "I thought I was just helping, being a good daughter." "You were being a good daughter. Too good. And they took advantage of that goodness until you had nothing left to give." Rachel reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card, but also something else. a small pamphlet with the title Financial Recovery After Family Exploitation. "I volunteer with a support group," she said. "People who've been in situations similar to ours. We meet once a week, and honestly, it's been life-changing. You don't have to deal with this alone." I picked up the pamphlet, skimming the contents. Topics included setting financial boundaries, rebuilding your credit after co-signing, and managing guilt and family pressure. "How many people are in your group?" I asked. "About 12 right now. Men and women, different ages, different family situations. But all of us have been where you are, financially drained by people who were supposed to love and protect us." The cafe was starting to fill up with the lunch crowd, and I suddenly felt very exposed having this conversation in public. Rachel seemed to sense my discomfort. "Would you like to get some air? Maybe walk around the block?" I nodded, gathering my things. Outside, the December air was crisp but not bitter, and the sidewalks were mostly clear of the snow that had fallen earlier in the week. "Can I ask you something?" I said as we started walking. "How did you finally cut ties with your family?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "It took me 2 years longer than it should have. Even after I realized what was happening, I kept making excuses. It's just this one time. Things will get better once Tyler gets his life together. Family is supposed to help each other." "What changed?" "Tyler totaled the motorcycle, completely destroyed it, and he wasn't even injured, thank God. But the insurance didn't cover the full amount because he'd been drinking. My parents called me, crying, saying they didn't know how they were going to make the loan payments." She stopped walking and turned to face me. I was sitting in my car outside their house, holding a check for $8,000, money I'd scraped together from my emergency fund. And I suddenly realized I was about to bail out someone who had just endangered lives because he was drunk. And I was supposed to do it because we share DNA. "Did you give them the money?" I tore up the check, right there in my car. Then I drove to the bank and removed my name from every account I'd ever co-signed. That was 8 months ago, and I haven't spoken to any of them since. We'd completed a full loop around the block and were back at the cafe. I felt lighter somehow, like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted. "Do you miss them?" I asked. Rachel considered this carefully. "I miss the family I thought I had. I miss the idea of unconditional love and support. But I don't miss the anxiety, the constant financial stress, the feeling like I was never good enough no matter how much I sacrificed." She handed me her business card. "The support group meets Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. at the community center on Oak Street. You don't have to commit to anything, but if you want to talk to people who understand exactly what you're going through, we're there. What if my family tries to contact me? What if they want to reconcile? Then you'll have to decide what reconciliation looks like for you. But here's what I learned. Real reconciliation requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing, genuine apology, and changed behavior. Not just words about how much they miss you or need you." As she walked away, I stood outside Brewster's Cafe holding her business card and the support group pamphlet. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I didn't feel completely alone. That evening, I Googled family financial abuse and spent 3 hours reading articles, forums, and testimonials from people whose stories sounded remarkably similar to mine. The golden child sibling, the responsible child who becomes the family ATM, the guilt, the manipulation, the way financial exploitation gets disguised as family loyalty. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't selfish, I wasn't ungrateful. The Maniam Lasaya Lechaispacht. I was someone who had been systematically taken advantage of by people who were supposed to protect me. And for the first time in years, that distinction felt like everything. PB, Tuesday evening couldn't come fast enough. Tuesday evening arrived with a fresh snowfall that made Millbrook Heights look like a postcard. I sat in my car outside the Oak Street Community Center for 10 minutes, watching people walk through the glass doors, wondering if I was ready for this. The support group pamphlet sat on my passenger seat, wrinkled from being folded and unfolded dozens of times over the past 4 days. Finally, at 6:58 p.m., I forced myself out of the car. The meeting room was small and comfortable, with a circle of chairs and soft lighting that felt more like someone's living room than an institutional space. Rachel was there, talking quietly with a man about my father's age, and she waved me over with a warm smile. "Victoria, I'm so glad you came." She introduced me to the group, 12 people ranging in age from early 20s to late 50s, all with the same slightly guarded expression I probably wore. "Everyone, this is Victoria. She's dealing with a family financial situation." What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my experience. One by one, they shared stories that could have been pulled from my own life. Sarah, a nurse whose parents had been draining her accounts to fund her drug-addicted brother's recovery attempts. Marcus, a teacher who discovered his wife had been secretly sending thousands of dollars to her adult daughter while they struggled to pay their own bills. Janet, whose elderly mother had been guilt-tripping her into covering the mortgage on a house she couldn't afford, all while giving expensive gifts to Janet's siblings who, quote, needed the support more. When it was my turn to share, the words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. I told them about the co-signing, the secret payments, the Christmas car, the gas station gift card. I told them about feeling invisible in my own family, about being valued only for my financial utility, about the guilt that had been eating me alive since Christmas Eve. Nobody interrupted. Nobody offered advice. They just listened with the kind of understanding that can only come from having walked the same path. "The hardest part," said David, a software engineer whose brother had been using his credit cards for years without permission, "is realizing that the family you thought you belonged to never actually existed. You were loving an illusion." That hit me like a physical blow, because it was exactly right. I'd been mourning the loss of a family that had never really included me in the first place. After the meeting, Rachel and I went to a nearby diner where she helped me understand what recovery actually looked like. "The first step," she said, "is practical. You've already done most of it by removing yourself from their accounts. But now you need to protect yourself going forward." She pulled out a legal pad and started writing. New bank account at a completely different institution. New credit cards that no one else has access to. Change your mailing address if any of their bills have ever come to your apartment. You want to create a financial firewall between you and them. "What about my credit score?" I asked. "If they default on loans I co-signed before I removed myself." That's where the documentation you've been keeping becomes crucial. You need to contact the credit bureaus and file disputes for any accounts where you can prove fraudulent use or where you were removed as an authorized user. The paper trail you've created is going to save you. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my financial life with the same methodical approach I'd used to manage everyone else's finances for 3 years. I opened new accounts at Pinnacle Credit Union, a small local institution that had no connection to any of my family's banks. I applied for 2 new credit cards in my name only, with statements sent to a P.O. box I rented specifically for this purpose. But the most transformative thing I did was create a budget that was entirely, completely mine. For the first time in my adult life, I was calculating monthly expenses that included only my own needs and wants. Rent, $850. Groceries, $400. Utilities, $120. Car payment, $230. Insurance, $85. Student loan, $175. Basic expenses totaled $1,860 per month. My net income was $3,400. I stared at that number for a long time. After covering all my actual living expenses, I had $1,540 left over every month. Every month. Money that belonged to me, that I could save or spend or invest however I chose. I'd been living like a broke college student while earning a comfortable middle-class salary, all because I'd been subsidizing someone else's lifestyle. The realization was staggering. I started making lists, not the careful, responsible lists I'd been making for years to track other people's expenses, but dream lists. Things I wanted to do, places I wanted to go, ways I wanted to improve my life. At the top of the list, move out of the studio apartment. I'd been living in 400 square feet not because I couldn't afford better, but because every extra dollar had been going to cover someone else's mortgage payment. Now, with my real budget in front of me, I could afford a 1-bedroom, maybe even a place with a balcony, or a dishwasher, or in-unit laundry. The apartment hunting process felt like shopping for someone else's life. I looked at places with actual closets, with kitchens big enough for a full-size refrigerator. with living rooms where you could have guests over without everyone sitting on the bed. I found it on the third day of looking. A one-bedroom apartment in Harbor Crossings, a newer complex with a gym, a pool, and covered parking. The rent was $1,200 per month, $350 more than my studio, but still well within my actual budget. "When would you like to move in?" the leasing agent asked. "As soon as possible," I said. I signed the lease that afternoon. That evening, I called in sick to work. The first mental health day I'd taken in 2 years, and spent the entire day shopping for my new life. Real furniture, not the hand-me-downs and clearance finds I'd been making do with. A comfortable sofa, a dining table, a bed frame that wasn't held together with duct tape and hope. At Target, I found myself standing in the home goods section, holding a set of matching dishes, and I started crying right there in the aisle. Not sad tears, but tears of relief and possibility. I was buying dishes for a home that would be entirely mine, where every decision about money and space and priorities would be made by me, for me. The woman at the checkout counter looked concerned. "Are you okay, honey?" "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it. Moving day was January 15th. I hired professional movers, something I never would have allowed myself before, and watched them carefully transport my few possessions to a space that felt impossibly large and bright after the cramped studio. But the best part came that evening, when I was unpacking boxes in my new living room. My phone rang with an unknown number, and for a split second, my old habits kicked in. Unknown number usually meant family emergency, usually meant someone needed money transferred, or a bill paid, or a crisis managed. Then I remembered. That wasn't my job anymore. I let it go to voicemail. Later, when I was ready, I listened to the message. It was Dad, his voice strained and desperate. "Victoria, we need to talk. The mortgage payment is late and the bank is calling. Your mother is beside herself. Please call us back. We can work something out." I deleted the message and blocked the number. Then I opened a bottle of wine I'd bought for myself, ran a bath in my new bathroom with the actual bathtub, and made a list of everything I wanted to accomplish in this new life I was building. Graduate school applications. I had been putting off my MBA for 3 years because I couldn't afford the program fees. Travel. I wanted to see Europe, Asia, anywhere that wasn't within driving distance of people who expected me to solve their problems. Investment account. For the first time in my life, I had money to invest for my own future. Emergency fund. A real one that wouldn't get drained every month by other people's emergencies. As I made the list, I realized something profound. I wasn't just changing my living situation or my budget. I was changing my entire identity. For 3 years, I'd been Victoria the fixer, Victoria the responsible one, Victoria who could always be counted on to solve everyone else's problems. Now I was becoming Victoria the free, Victoria who made her own choices, Victoria who was building a life that belonged entirely to her, and that Victoria had big plans. 3 weeks into February, I was settling into my new life with a confidence I'd never experienced before. My morning routine now included coffee in an actual kitchen, not a corner with a hot plate. I'd started taking evening walks around Harbor Crossings, enjoying the luxury of having sidewalks that were well lit and safe. My savings account was growing by $1,500 every month, and I'd already submitted applications to 3 MBA programs. Then the assault began. It started subtly. A mutual friend from high school, Jessica Torres, sent me a message on Facebook. "Hey girl, haven't heard from you in forever. Your mom ran into me at the grocery store and mentioned you guys are going through a rough patch. She seemed really worried about you. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, my stomach knotting. Of course they weren't going to respect my boundaries. Of course they were going to try to use other people to get to me. I responded simply, "Thanks for checking in. I'm doing great, actually. Hope you are too." But Jessica's message was just the beginning. Over the next week, I received concerned messages from 3 more family friends, my high school guidance counselor, and even Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor from my parents' street, who had somehow gotten my phone number. Each message followed the same pattern. They'd run into my family seemed distressed about our misunderstanding, and they were just checking to make sure I was okay. The most manipulative came from Father Martinez at St. Catherine's, the church my family attended sporadically, but claimed as their spiritual home during crises. Victoria, your parents spoke with me after Sunday service. They're deeply troubled by this rift in your family. As you know, forgiveness is at the heart of our faith. Perhaps we could meet for coffee and discuss ways to heal these wounds? I deleted that message immediately. Using religion to guilt someone into enabling financial abuse was a new low, even for them. But the real test came on a Tuesday morning when I arrived at Hartwell & Associates to find Delilah sitting in our lobby. She looked different than she had at Christmas. Thinner, maybe, or just less polished. Her usual designer clothes had been replaced with more ordinary pieces, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, instead of the elaborate styles she usually preferred. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Victoria, please, just 5 minutes." My first instinct was to keep walking, to tell security there was someone in the lobby who didn't belong there. But something about her appearance stopped me. She looked genuinely distressed, not just manipulative. 5 minutes, I said. In the conference room. That's it. She followed me to the small conference room we used for client meetings, and I left the door open. I wasn't taking any chances on this becoming a dramatic scene that would affect my professional reputation. "Thank you," she said, sitting across from me at the polished table. "I know you probably don't want to see me." "What do you want, Delilah?" "I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say sorry because Mom told me I had to." She took a shaky breath. "I had no idea you were paying for our lives. I swear to you, Victoria, I had no idea." I studied her face, looking for the tells I'd learned to recognize over the years. The slight smile that meant she was enjoying a performance. The way her eyes would dart to the side when she was calculating her next move. But all I saw was what looked like genuine remorse. "What happened to the car?" I asked. "We returned it, lost about $3,000 in fees and restocking charges, but we got most of the money back." She rubbed her face with her hands. "Mom and Dad they're not handling this well. Dad's been calling the bank every day trying to figure out payment plans. Mom's been having panic attacks. That's not my problem anymore." I know it's not. And I'm not here to ask you to fix it." Delilah leaned forward, her voice getting more urgent. "I'm here because I need you to know that I'm moving out. I got a job at a photography studio in downtown Portland, and I'm getting my own apartment." This surprised me. "Why?" "Because living there without your safety net has shown me exactly what kind of people our parents really are." Her voice got bitter. "Do you know what Dad said when the first credit card payment bounced? He said it was your fault for being dramatic and selfish. Not his fault for spending money he didn't have. Your fault for not enabling it anymore." I felt a familiar stab of guilt, quickly followed by anger at myself for feeling guilty. "Delilah, I'm not responsible for—" "I know," she interrupted. "That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you. I spent 2 weeks listening to them blame you for their financial problems, and it made me sick. You weren't the one who bought me a car we couldn't afford. You weren't the one who spent money we didn't have for 3 years. You were the one keeping us all from drowning, and instead of being grateful, they treated you like a servant." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote down everything I could remember about gifts they bought me, trips they funded, things they paid for over the past 3 years. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I wanted you to see that I understand now." I unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten list in Delilah's neat cursive. Spring break trip to Cabo, $2,800. Photography equipment for Christmas 2021, $1,500. Car insurance paid in full for 2 years, $2,400. Security deposit and first month's rent for San Francisco apartment, $3,200. The list went on for 2 pages, totaling over $25,000. "I added it up," she said quietly, $26,400. "That's what they spent on me in 3 years, money that ultimately came from you. And I never even said thank you." I stared at the list, feeling a complex mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication, because here was proof, in black and white, of exactly how lopsided the family dynamics had been. Sadness because my sister had to do accounting to understand how badly I'd been treated. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I want you to know that someone in our family sees what really happened. someone acknowledges what you sacrificed. She paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. And because I want to pay you back. Not all at once, I can't afford that, but over time, starting with my portion of what they spent. Delilah, you don't need to. Yes, I do, I absolutely do. Her voice was firm now, more determined than I'd ever heard her. I can't control what Mom and Dad do or don't do. I can't make them apologize or acknowledge what they put you through. But I can take responsibility for my part in it. She reached into her purse again and pulled out an envelope. This is $500. It's not much, but it's what I can afford this month. I calculated that if I pay you $500 a month, I can pay back my portion in about 4 years. I stared at the envelope like it might explode. I don't want your money, Delilah. It's not about what you want, it's about what's right. She pushed the envelope across the table. You spent 3 years taking care of all of us. The least I can do is take care of my own debt. We sat in silence for a moment. Through the conference room windows, I could see my coworkers starting their normal Tuesday, answering phones, reviewing reports, living lives uncomplicated by family financial drama. Are you really moving out? I asked. Already put a deposit down on a studio apartment in the Pearl District. It's tiny and expensive, but it's mine. She smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. I figure it's time I learned what it feels like to actually pay my own way. What about Mom and Dad? What about them? They're adults. They made their choices, and now they get to live with the consequences. Her expression hardened. I'm not going to enable them the way they expected you to enable them forever. After she left, I sat in the conference room for a long time, staring at the envelope she'd left behind. Inside was exactly what she'd promised. 5 crisp $100 bills and a handwritten note that said simply, "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. Nash's D." That afternoon, I called Rachel. She came to your workplace? Rachel's voice was sharp with concern. Victoria, that's a classic escalation tactic. When direct contact doesn't work, they start involving other people and showing up where you can't easily leave. But she seemed genuine. She apologized, she acknowledged what happened, she even brought money. And that's great, if it's real. But you need to be careful. Family members who participate in financial abuse often become allies when the gravy train stops. But they can just as easily become weapons when they think it might get the money flowing again. I knew Rachel was right to be cautious, but something about Delilah's visit felt different. The sister who had sat in my conference room wasn't the same person who had smugly accepted a BMW while I got a gas station gift card. This person seemed genuinely shocked by what she'd learned about our family's finances. But Rachel's warning stayed with me. That evening, I called my building's front desk and added Delilah along with my parents to the list of people who were not authorized to visit my apartment. I changed my work schedule slightly, arriving and leaving at different times to make it harder for anyone to ambush me in the parking lot. Because while I wanted to believe that Delilah's apology was genuine, I'd learned the hard way that in my family, money changed everything. And there was still a lot of money at stake. The real test would be whether her actions matched her words when the pressure from my parents inevitably intensified. I had a feeling I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. The confrontation I'd been dreading came on a Friday evening in early March, but not in any way I could have predicted. I was leaving Hartwell & Associates after a particularly good day. I'd just received confirmation that my MBA application to Portland State had been accepted, with a partial scholarship that would cover 60% of tuition. I was walking to my car, mentally calculating how the program would fit into my new budget, when I heard familiar voices coming from the direction of the parking garage. My parents were standing near the entrance, talking to my supervisor, Janet Morrison. My blood turned to ice water. "She's always been such a responsible girl," my mother was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of concern she used when she wanted to appear reasonable. "We're just so worried about her. This isn't like Victoria at all." Janet looked uncomfortable but polite, the way you do when strangers approach you with personal information about your employees. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, Victoria's mother. And this is her father." Mom gestured to Dad, who was wearing his most trustworthy expression, The one he used when talking to bank managers about loan modifications. We haven't heard from her in months, and we're concerned she might be having some kind of breakdown. I stood frozen behind a concrete pillar, listening to them systematically attempt to sabotage my professional reputation. She's cut off all contact with her family, Dad added, shaking his head sadly. Won't return calls, won't visit. Her sister is beside herself with worry. We're wondering if maybe work stress has been affecting her judgment? Janet glanced around uncomfortably. I really can't discuss employee matters with unauthorized individuals. If you're concerned about Victoria's well-being, perhaps you should contact her directly. We've tried, Mom said, and I could hear tears in her voice. Real or performed, I couldn't tell anymore. She won't speak to us. We're hoping maybe someone at work has noticed changes in her behavior, signs that she needs help. That's when I stepped out from behind the pillar. What exactly are you doing here? All three of them turned to face me. Janet looked relieved to see me. My parents looked like they'd been caught shoplifting. Victoria! Mom's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine joy, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. Sweetheart, we've been so worried. You're at my workplace, I said, my voice deadly calm, talking to my supervisor, suggesting I'm having a breakdown. What exactly did you think was going to happen here? Dad stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation. Now, Victoria, we just wanted to make sure you were okay. When someone cuts off all contact with their family. Janet, I said, turning to my supervisor, could you give us a moment? This is a personal matter. Janet nodded quickly and disappeared into the building, clearly grateful to escape what was obviously a family confrontation. Once she was gone, I looked at my parents with all the fury I'd been suppressing for months. How dare you come to my workplace? How dare you try to make me look unstable to my colleagues? We're your parents, Mom said, her voice getting stronger now that Janet was gone. We have a right to be concerned when our daughter disappears without explanation. Without explanation? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I gave you a very detailed explanation on Christmas Eve. I showed you spreadsheets. I documented 3 years of financial abuse. The only thing I didn't explain was why I put up with it for so long. Financial abuse? Dad's voice took on that dismissive tone I remembered from childhood. Don't be so dramatic, Victoria. We're family. Family helps each other. Family helps each other, I repeated. Let me ask you something, Dad. In the 3 months since I stopped covering your expenses, how many times have you asked how I'm doing? How many times have you wondered if I might need help with something? He blinked, clearly not expecting the question. The answer is 0, I continued. Because you don't actually care about my well-being. You care about my bank account. Mom stepped closer, reaching out like she was going to touch my arm. Sweetheart, you're angry, and I understand that. But we can work through this as a family. I stepped back, keeping distance between us. What family? The family where I worked 60-hour weeks while you spent money I didn't have? The family where my Christmas present was a gas station gift card, while my sister got a BMW? The family that planned elaborate surprises for months without including me because I was just the person who paid for things? We made mistakes, Dad admitted grudgingly. But this has gone too far. We could lose the house, Victoria. And there it was. The real reason they were here. Not concern for my well-being. Not desire to repair our relationship. They were facing financial consequences, and they needed their human ATM back in service. You could lose the house, I said slowly. Let me ask you something. Whose name is on the mortgage? Well, ours obviously, but you co-signed. And whose name did I have removed from all the loan documents in December? Dad's face went pale as he realized where this was going. That's right, I said. I'm not legally responsible for your mortgage anymore. I'm not co-signed on your credit cards anymore. I'm not guaranteeing your car payments anymore. Your financial problems are exactly that. Your problems. But we can't afford. Mom started. Then maybe you shouldn't have spent 3 years living beyond your means, I interrupted. Maybe you should have thought about affordability before you bought a $24,000 car for someone who already had transportation. Maybe you should have considered the consequences before you treated your daughter like a personal loan company. A small crowd was starting to gather in the parking garage. Other employees leaving work, curious about the raised voices. I lowered my voice but kept my tone firm. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my workplace and never come back. You're going to stop contacting my friends, my colleagues, and random people from church trying to make me look unstable. You're going to stop using other people to try to guilt me into resuming your financial support. And if we don't? Dad asked, his voice getting an edge I remembered from childhood arguments. Then I'll file for a restraining order, and I'll make sure everyone you've contacted gets a full explanation of why I cut ties with you, complete with documentation of exactly how much money you took from me over the years. Mom gasped. You wouldn't. Try me. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app, holding it where they could see it. In fact, let's make this official. State your names and explain why you're here at my workplace on March 8, 2024. They both stepped back like the phone was a weapon. Victoria, you don't need to. Dad started. My name is Victoria Chen, I said clearly into the phone. I'm standing in the parking garage of my workplace with my parents, who are here without my permission, attempting to interfere with my professional relationships after I ended contact with them due to years of financial exploitation. Stop recording, Mom hissed. Why? Worried about having your words documented? Concerned that someone might have proof of what you're really trying to accomplish here? I stopped the recording and put my phone away. You have exactly 30 seconds to get off this property before I call security. They looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Dad nodded toward the parking garage exit. This isn't over, Victoria, he said. Yes, it is. I watched them walk away, Mom's heels clicking on the concrete, Dad's shoulders rigid with frustration. They got into their sedan, the one with payments I'd been covering until 3 months ago, and drove away. Only then did I realize my hands were shaking. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, processing what had just happened. They'd escalated to workplace harassment. They'd tried to damage my professional reputation to pressure me into resuming financial support. They'd shown exactly how far they were willing to go to get their money source back. But I'd stood my ground. I'd documented their behavior. And I'd made it clear that further harassment would have legal consequences. That evening, I emailed Janet Morrison with a brief, professional explanation. I wanted to follow up on the incident in the parking garage today. I'm dealing with a family situation that involved financial boundary setting. My parents are having difficulty accepting those boundaries. I apologize for any disruption to the workplace and want to assure you that I've made it clear they are not to return to company property. Janet's response came within an hour. Thank you for the clarification. No need to apologize. These situations can be challenging. Please let me know if you need any additional support from HR. I forwarded both emails to Rachel, along with the voice recording from the parking garage. Her response was immediate. Time to document everything and consider that restraining order. This is escalation behavior, and it's only going to get worse as they get more desperate. She was right. But for the first time since this whole situation began, I felt completely prepared for whatever came next. They'd shown their true colors in public, in front of witnesses, on recording, and I had proof of everything. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late March, exactly 3 weeks after the parking garage confrontation. I was getting ready for work, running through my new morning routine in my beautiful apartment, when an unknown number lit up my screen. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers had become a red flag since my parents started their harassment campaign. But something made me pick up. Victoria? It's Aunt Regina. My mother's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but her voice was unmistakable. Gravelly from decades of cigarettes, with the same slight accent Mom had never quite lost. Aunt Regina. Hi. I sat down on my couch, immediately on guard. Honey, I'm calling because your parents are in real trouble, and I think you need to know. What kind of trouble? Financial trouble. Bad financial trouble. She paused, and I could hear her lighting a cigarette. They got served with foreclosure papers yesterday. The bank is starting proceedings to take the house. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and guilt wash over me. Vindication because this proved I'd been right about their unsustainable spending. Guilt because, despite everything, these were still the people who'd raised me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "Are you?" Regina's voice was sharp. "Because your mother seems to think this is all your fault." "My fault?" "She says you cut them off financially without warning. Says you were helping with bills and then just stopped because of some family argument." I almost laughed. "Is that how she's telling the story?" "That's exactly how she's telling it. She called me crying yesterday, saying her ungrateful daughter abandoned the family over a misunderstanding about Christmas presents." I took a deep breath. Aunt Regina had always been the family truth-teller, the one who called people on their nonsense. If anyone would understand what really happened, it would be her. "Aunt Regina, did my mother mention that I'd been co-signing their loans and covering their mortgage shortfalls for 3 years?" Silence on the other end of the line. "Did she mention that they spent $24,000 on a car for Delilah without telling me, using credit cards that I was ultimately responsible for?" More silence. "Did she mention that my Christmas present was a $25 gas station gift card, while they were planning this surprise car purchase for months?" Finally, Regina spoke. "No, she didn't mention any of that. Well, that's the real story. I didn't abandon them over Christmas presents. I stopped enabling their financial irresponsibility after discovering they'd been living $1,800 over their means every month for years, with me covering the difference." "Jesus Christ," Regina's voice was quiet. "How much money are we talking about?" "Almost $50,000 over 3 years. Money that came out of my savings, my emergency fund, my paychecks. Money I used to keep their credit score from tanking and their house from being foreclosed on. And they never acknowledged this? Never thanked you? They never even told me they were struggling. They just let me figure it out when their payments started bouncing, and I'd quietly transfer money to cover it. They treated me like an automatic safety net." Regina was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, angrier. "Your mother called me last night begging for money. Said the family needed to stick together, that we couldn't let them lose the house. She wanted me to loan them $15,000. Did you? I was considering it. I have some savings, and I thought, family, you know." She took a long drag on her cigarette. "But now I'm wondering how much of their financial crisis is actually their own damn fault." "All of it," I said bluntly. "Every single bit of it. They were spending money they didn't have, assuming I'd always be there to cover the difference. The only thing that changed is that I stopped enabling them." "Shit, Victoria. I had no idea. Nobody did. Because they didn't want anyone to know that their perfect lifestyle was being subsidized by their daughter." After I hung up with Regina, I sat in my living room for a long time, processing the conversation. They were facing foreclosure. The house in Riverside Oaks, the one I'd helped them keep for 3 years, was going to be taken by the bank. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt guilty, but mostly, I felt free. The real test came that afternoon, when I got a text from an unknown number. "Victoria, this is your father. We need to talk. The situation has become serious. We're willing to negotiate." Negotiate, like I was a creditor instead of their daughter. I showed the text to Rachel during our coffee meeting that evening. "This is classic," she said, shaking her head. "First they tried guilt. Then they tried public shame. Now they're trying to negotiate like this is a business transaction. Should I respond?" "That depends. Do you want a relationship with them?" It was a question I'd been avoiding for months. Did I want a relationship with my parents? Not the relationship we'd had, where I was their financial safety net, but a real relationship, built on mutual respect and genuine care? "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe they've learned something from this. Part of me wonders if they're just desperate enough to say whatever I want to hear." "There's a way to find out," Rachel said, "but it requires you to be very clear about your terms." That evening, I drafted a response to my father's text. "I'm willing to have one conversation. In a public place. with a neutral witness present. If you're genuinely interested in repairing our relationship, not resuming financial support, we can talk. His response came within minutes. Yes. Anything. When and where. I arranged to meet them at Brewster's Cafe on Saturday afternoon, with Rachel present as my support person. I spent the week mentally preparing for every possible manipulation tactic they might try. But when Saturday arrived, the people who walked into that cafe looked nothing like the confident, entitled parents who had ambushed me at work 3 weeks earlier. Dad looked like he'd aged 5 years and 3 months. His hair was grayer, his clothes less pristine. Mom looked fragile in a way I'd never seen before, like someone who'd been crying for weeks. They sat across from Rachel and me in the corner booth, and for the first time in my memory, they looked genuinely humbled. "Victoria," Mom began, her voice barely above a whisper, "we owe you an apology." "For what, specifically?" I asked. "For taking advantage of your generosity. For not acknowledging your sacrifices. For treating you like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like an employee instead of our daughter?" Dad nodded. "We got comfortable. We got used to you fixing things, and we stopped seeing you as a person with your own needs and limitations." "What about the workplace harassment?" I asked. They both looked down at the table. "That was wrong," Dad admitted. "We were desperate, and we thought if we could make you look unstable, you might need family support again." The honesty was startling and terrifying, because it meant they'd consciously tried to sabotage my professional reputation as a manipulation tactic. "We've talked to a financial counselor," Mom said. "We're selling the house. We found a smaller place we can actually afford on Dad's income alone. We're also looking into bankruptcy," Dad added. "The debt load is just, we can't dig out of this hole." I studied their faces, looking for signs of manipulation, for the tells I'd learned to recognize over the years. But all I saw was defeat and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," Mom said quickly. "We don't want money. We don't want you to fix this. We want to know if there's any chance you could forgive us someday. If there's any chance we could earn back the right to be your parents instead of your burden." It was the first time in 3 years that they'd asked for something I might actually be able to give. But trust, once broken this completely, doesn't heal overnight. "That depends," I said, "on whether you can prove you've actually changed. Not just until you're back on your feet financially, but permanently." "How do we do that?" Dad asked. "Time," I said. "Consistent behavior over time. And absolute respect for the boundaries I set." The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end, we had an agreement. Supervised visits once a month for 6 months, with Rachel or another neutral party present. No financial discussions. No guilt trips about their situation. No attempts to involve extended family or mutual friends in our relationship. If they could respect those boundaries for 6 months, we could discuss expanding contact. If they couldn't, I'd pursue the restraining order. As they left the cafe, Mom turned back to me one more time. "Victoria? For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. For standing up for yourself. For building a life that's actually yours." I should have said that years ago. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation. But it was something I'd never heard from her before. Acknowledgement that I was a person worth being proud of, independent of what I could provide for others. It was a start. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of my new 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Portland, preparing Christmas dinner for a family I'd chosen rather than inherited. The apartment was everything my old studio wasn't. Spacious, bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city and a kitchen island where people could actually gather. The rent was $1,800 a month, which would have been unthinkable when I was subsidizing someone else's lifestyle. Now it was just 20% of my income from my new position as senior financial analyst at Morrison Capital Group, a promotion that came with a 40% salary increase and a signing bonus that had finally allowed me to fully fund my emergency savings. Rachel was setting the table in my dining room, arranging the good dishes I'd bought for myself last spring. David from our support group was opening wine, telling stories about his recent trip to New Zealand, a trip he'd been able to afford after cutting financial ties with his gambling-addicted brother. Sarah was in the living room, showing photos from her wedding, to a man who loved her for who she was, not what she could provide. My tis has ti kosi trusty. This was my chosen family. People who understood the journey from financial exploitation to independence. People who celebrated each other's boundaries instead of trying to tear them down. Delilah arrived at exactly 6 p.m., carrying a bottle of wine and a small wrapped box. She'd kept her promise over the past year, sending me $500 every month without fail, along with brief updates about her photography business and her new life in the Pearl District. We'd had coffee together twice, careful conversations where we were both learning who we could be to each other without the old family dynamics. "How was the session today?" I asked as she handed me the wine. "Good, really good, actually." She was seeing a therapist to work through her own guilt about benefiting from the family's financial exploitation. Dr. Martinez thinks I'm ready to stop the monthly payments soon, not because I can't afford them, but because I've processed the guilt and learned to separate my responsibility from theirs. I nodded. The payments had never been about the money for me. My financial life was solid without them. They'd been about Delilah taking accountability for her role in the family dynamics. The fact that she was ready to stop meant she'd done the emotional work. "There's something else," she said, glancing around the apartment filled with my chosen family. "Mom and Dad asked me to give you this." She handed me the small wrapped box. Inside was a simple card with a handwritten note. "Victoria, we know we don't have the right to ask for forgiveness yet. We're grateful for the chance to earn it. We hope someday you'll feel safe enough to let us try. We're proud of the woman you've become. Mom and Dad." It was the first communication I'd received from them in 8 months. After our supervised meetings ended, successfully, with no boundary violations, we'd agreed to minimal contact while they sorted out their bankruptcy and downsizing. They'd moved to a modest rental house in Beaverton, Dad had taken a part-time job to supplement his reduced hours at the plant, and Mom was working retail for the first time in her adult life. I set the card aside. I wasn't ready to process it in the middle of Christmas dinner with my chosen family. Thais. "How are they really doing?" I asked Delilah. "Better than I expected. Humbled, but better. They're actually talking to each other differently now. Less blame, more cooperation. It's like losing the house forced them to remember they're supposed to be partners, not just people who split the bills." We moved into the dining room, where Rachel was putting the finishing touches on a table that looked like something from a magazine. The difference between this Christmas and last year was almost surreal. Last year, I'd been alone in my studio apartment, eating takeout and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. This year, I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. As we sat down to dinner, David raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to Victoria for hosting, to all of us for choosing healing over enabling, and to the radical idea that we don't owe anyone our financial stability just because they share our DNA." "To chosen family," Rachel added. "To boundaries that actually stick," Sarah said. "To discovering what we're worth when we're not being bled dry," Delilah added quietly. As we ate, I found myself thinking about the person I'd been a year ago. Exhausted, resentful, living in survival mode while pretending everything was fine. I'd thought that being responsible meant taking care of everyone else's irresponsibility. I'd thought that love meant sacrifice without acknowledgement or appreciation. But this year had taught me something different. Real love, the kind worth having, respects your boundaries. Real family, blood or chosen, celebrates your success instead of exploiting it. Real relationships are built on mutual support, not one-sided financial extraction. My phone buzzed with a text from my MBA advisor. "Congratulations! Your thesis on family financial abuse has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Financial Planning. This could be career-changing." I'd spent the past year not just rebuilding my own life, but researching and writing about the phenomenon that had nearly destroyed me, turning my experience into something that could help others recognize and escape similar situations. "Good news?" Rachel asked, noticing my smile. "My thesis is getting published. About family financial abuse and recovery strategies." The table erupted in congratulations. These people understood what that meant. Not just professional achievement, but the transformation of trauma into purpose. After dinner, as we moved to the living room with coffee and dessert, Sarah asked the question I'd been expecting. So what's next for you? You've got the apartment, the promotion, the publication. What does year 2 of freedom look like? I'd been thinking about that a lot lately. I had everything I'd thought I wanted when I was trapped in the old situation. Financial security, professional recognition, healthy relationships, a beautiful home that was entirely mine. But there was something else I wanted now, something I'd never allowed myself to dream about when every spare dollar was going to someone else's crisis. I want to start a nonprofit, I said. Financial literacy and recovery services for people escaping family financial abuse. Too many people don't even know what's happening to them has a name, let alone that there are legal protections and recovery strategies. That's amazing, Delilah said. And honestly, it makes sense. You've always been good at helping people. You just needed to learn to help people who actually appreciated it. As the evening wound down and my guests began to leave, I walked out onto my balcony overlooking the city. Portland sparkled below me, full of lights and possibilities. Somewhere out there were people in the situation I'd escaped, working multiple jobs to fund someone else's lifestyle, believing that love meant endless financial sacrifice, trapped by guilt and obligation and the fear of being labeled selfish. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, standing in my parents' driveway holding a gas station gift card while they celebrated spending my money on someone else's dream. That woman had felt invisible, worthless, trapped in a role she'd never chosen but couldn't figure out how to escape. I thought about the woman I was now, professionally successful, financially independent, surrounded by people who valued my well-being over my bank account. A woman who'd learned that the opposite of selfish isn't selfless, it's self-aware. The nonprofit would take time to build, but I had time now. I had energy that wasn't being drained by other people's poor decisions. I had money that was actually mine to invest in causes I believed in. I had a voice that had learned to say no without justification and yes without guilt. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. Hi Victoria, I got your contact info from Rachel Martinez. My family situation sounds a lot like what you went through. Would you be willing to talk? I don't know how to get out. Amanda? I smiled, typing back immediately. Of course, let's set up a coffee meeting. You're not alone, and it does get better, I promise. As I headed back inside to my warm, beautiful apartment filled with the remnants of a perfect Christmas dinner, I realized something profound. I wasn't just free from my old life anymore. I was free to build something completely new. And that freedom, the freedom to choose who to help, how to love, where to invest my time and energy and resources, was worth everything it had cost to claim it. The woman who had been erased by her family's financial exploitation was gone. Wes. In her place was someone who could never be erased again. Someone who knew exactly what she was worth and refused to accept anything less. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.